The Galactic Concord had only recently opened its arms to Earth, and with that came the chance of a lifetime for a select few, full scholarships to the most prestigious alien universities across the stars. Among the thousands who applied, Caleb Winters, a curious, easygoing young human from rural Montana, was one of the lucky ones. He was accepted into Veritas Interstellar Academy, a place where species from dozens of star systems came together to study diplomacy, science, and culture under one roof. For Caleb, it was a dream come true until he found out he'd be living. With an alien roommate. At first, he was thrilled, then nervous, then confused. Her name was Relika, and she was from the distant and secretive world of Shirakthal. There wasn't much data on her species. The Shiraxi just rumors and fragments of xenobiology reports. Most of what was known came from secondhand sources, that the Shiraxi preferred extreme humidity, that they communicated in layered vocal tones, and most notably that no one had ever seen one of them outside their shimmering, full-body robes. When Caleb first met Relika, she was exactly that, wrapped head to toe in glimmering blue nanofabric that flowed like water but clearly concealed everything beneath. Even her face was covered, though two glowing eyes were faintly visible beneath the veil. Despite her covered appearance, Relika moved with a fluid grace, almost like she was part wind, part shadow. She was quiet, formal, and precise in speech. When she first entered their dorm suite, she gave a respectful bow and introduced herself in Galactic Standard. "I am Relika of House Trell, second breath daughter of the Cloud Line." Caleb blinked. "You am Caleb from Montana." That pretty much summed up their early dynamic. At first, they communicated mostly about necessities, shared chores, temperature settings, and occasional food arrangements. Caleb did his best to be respectful. He refrained from asking personal questions, even when curiosity burned inside him. He learned quickly that the Shiraxi avoided direct contact, avoided mirrors, and never, ever removed their robes in front of others. Relika wasn't cold, just reserved. She spoke with the measured patience of someone who had lived in silence most of her life. And yet, Caleb noticed things, like how she always stood facing him, never letting her back be exposed. How she took exactly 17 minutes in the steam room every evening. And how she flinched slightly if someone entered her personal space unannounced. Caleb found himself walking a delicate tightrope, interested in his mysterious roommate, but unsure how far he was allowed to step. Over time, something like a friendship began to form. Caleb introduced her to Earth snacks like salted pretzels and bubble tea, which she found alarmingly textured but acceptable. She once explained how Shiraxi children are born as light forms and gain solid structure only after their sixth phase cycle. Caleb listened, enthralled, even though he barely understood half the terminology. But there was always the veil, always the robes, always the distance. Other students were curious about her too, but most gave up after a few polite attempts at conversation. She remained, in most people's eyes, an enigma, gorgeous, strange, untouchable. Then came the solar flare. Veritas Academy orbited a red dwarf star prone to periodic bursts of magnetic chaos. One evening, a particularly strong solar storm knocked out the regional power grid. While the Academy's emergency systems restored most vital functions, some areas like the communal bathhouse were left without power. Caleb, sore from a day of grueling alien martial arts classes, made his way to the bathhouse. Not knowing that his next step would change everything. He pushed open the door to the steamy chamber, expecting emptiness. Inside, the lights were flickering weakly, and the mist was thick. The only sounds were water dripping and the faint hum of broken climate systems. He took a few steps forward, towel over his shoulder, not expecting anyone else to be there, until a silhouette moved in the fog. What he saw next would haunt him in the most beautiful way possible. But in that moment, standing just outside the veil of truth, Caleb had no idea that he was about to glimpse something no human had ever seen. Not a secret, not a body, but a being in her truest form. The Academy's power outage wasn't unusual, but it came at the worst possible moment. A solar flare had lashed out from Veratus's red dwarf sun earlier that day, disrupting orbiting systems. Though emergency power restored essentials like life, support, and navigation, several areas, particularly the lesser-used recreational and hygiene zones, remained without lighting or sensor dash locks. Unaware of the implications, Caleb Winters grabbed a towel and a change of clothes and headed to the communal bathhouse. He was sore, exhausted, and simply looking to relax in the hot water and steam, not knowing that he was about to walk into a deeply sacred moment meant to be unseen by any outsider. As he stepped through the arching doorway, thick mist greeted him like a wall. The ambient lighting had failed completely, and only occasional flickers from the emergency glow strips pulsed weakly, creating long shadows that danced along the tiled walls. He paused at the entrance. "Hello?" he called softly, unsure if anyone else was there. Silence answered. Just the drip of condensation and the gentle bubbling of water. Assuming the room was empty, Caleb padded deeper into the bathhouse. The steam clung to him, making everything feel dreamlike. His footsteps echoed, muffled by the humidity. Then, through the mist, movement, just a slight shift of light and shape, caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a trick of the steam. Then he froze. Standing at the far edge of the pool, surrounded by vapor and shimmering droplets, was a form he did not recognize. Tall, graceful, and glowing faintly with bioluminescence, it looked almost like a creature of deep ocean currents. Limbs long and elegant, skin translucent in some places and opaque in others. Strands or tendrils floated around its head like a halo, each tip glowing with soft violet hues that pulsed with her breath. It took him a moment to realize who it was. Riel, aka not hidden, not robed, just her. She was fully uncloaked, her true self revealed for the first time. No veil, no shifting nanofabric, just skin that shimmered like wet glass under moonlight, iridescent and strangely human, yet completely alien. Her 6 eyes were open and unguarded, shimmering in triangular symmetry, each blinking independently as she turned and met Caleb's stunned gaze. Time stopped. Caleb's heart leapt into his throat. He knew he shouldn't stare, but he couldn't look away, not because she was strange, but because she was beautiful. Her body didn't follow the rules of human symmetry. She seemed to drift between solidity and softness, like her form was made of something more than matter. Her presence filled the air with something: energy, emotion, a sense of gravity that demanded reverence. She didn't scream. She didn't cover herself. She just looked at him with 6 eyes that spoke volumes. And in that moment, Caleb felt a deep stab of regret. Not for seeing her, but for intruding on something he now understood was private, sacred. He raised both hands slowly, palms out, stepping back without a word. I'm sorry," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know." Rilika didn't speak. She simply lowered her gaze, reached toward the bench beside her, and with a slow, graceful motion, drew her robe back around her body. Caleb turned away quickly and backed out of the chamber, heart pounding. He didn't sleep that night. His mind raced with what he had seen. Not just the physical form, but the vulnerability, the risk, and the fear in her expression. That wasn't a casual bath. That was a ritual. Maybe even an intimate tradition for her people. And he had barged in like a fool. He replayed the moment, over and over. The shimmer of her skin, the shifting colors that danced over her tendrils, The way her form seemed half in this world, half elsewhere. He had seen something no human was ever meant to witness. And now he feared he had ruined everything. Next morning, Relika didn't appear for breakfast. Nor did she speak to him when they crossed paths in the hallway. Her posture was stiff, her head slightly lowered, and for the first time since they met, her voice was completely absent. Caleb's stomach twisted with guilt. He hadn't just broken a rule, he had broken her trust, and somehow he would have to find a way to make it right. The silence between them grew thick in the days following the accidental encounter. Caleb Winters found himself tiptoeing through his own dorm suite like an intruder in his own space. Where once there had been quiet companionship, a few words exchanged over tea, the comfortable stillness of mutual study sessions, there was now a cold, impenetrable wall. Relika no longer sat in their shared common room. She took her meals elsewhere. When their schedules overlapped, she'd vanish before he could speak. The robe she wore was tighter now, wrapped higher, her luminous eyes dimmer beneath the shroud. Whatever ease she'd once shown around him was gone. And Caleb? He was consumed with guilt. He had apologized at least a dozen times once in person, and the rest in written messages carefully left on her side of the dorm or pinged to her through the private comm system. But there had been no reply. Not even a blinking notification of receipt. He considered asking for a room reassignment. Maybe it would be easier for both of them. Maybe the damage was too great to fix, but the thought of leaving, of walking away from someone who had shown him something no one else ever had felt like giving up. Caleb wasn't that kind of person. And Relika, beneath her silences and veils, didn't seem like someone who gave up easily either. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. During xenocultural anthropology, their shared class on interspecies traditions and diplomacy, Professor Velana, an avian scholar with bright feathers and a penchant for dramatics, was lecturing on trust forms and sacred revealing rituals. It was standard coursework. But Caleb listened differently now. Some species, the professor explained, possessed alternate form states of being only unveiled during intimate rites, religious ceremonies, or moments of profound emotional vulnerability. These forms weren't simply physical transformations. They were identity exposures, often tied to a species' deepest cultural foundations. Revealing one's true form without consent or context could be viewed as a violation. Witnessing such a form uninvited? Even worse. For some species, it bordered on sacrilege. The Shiraxi were mentioned only briefly. Velana explained that little was known of them, but it was theorized they, too, had internal forms rarely, if ever, seen. Caleb sat frozen in his seat, mind reeling. He hadn't just walked in on Relika changing. He had accidentally seen her soul. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He spent hours writing and rewriting a message, trying to find the right words. Finally, he gave up on perfection and just told the truth. He left a handwritten letter on her door, something tangible, human, vulnerable. I know I broke something sacred. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I saw you, not your body, but the trust you didn't mean to share. And I've carried that moment like something fragile ever since. If you never speak to me again, I understand. But I swear, Relika, I didn't look with judgment. I looked with wonder. And I left because you deserved privacy. Because you deserve choice. I hope someday you'll choose to speak to me again, not as someone who saw too much, but as someone who still wants to earn your trust. 2 more days passed. Still no response. Then, just before lights out on the 3rd night, there was a soft knock at his door. Relika stood there in her full robes. Her eyes were glowing a bit brighter than they had been. I received your message, she said, voice quiet and deliberate. You ... chose the right words. Caleb stood, heart pounding. Unsure what to say, I didn't know, he finally whispered. What it meant. What I saw. I believe you, she said. She stepped into the room, paused, and continued. In my culture, we do not show our true form unless the bond is sacred, shared only with those we trust with our existence. I broke that, Caleb said, guilt plain in his voice. No, Relika corrected gently. You entered it, but you didn't shatter it. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap. For weeks, I thought I had to erase you from my world to preserve my safety. But then, I realized you did not run. You did not speak of what you saw. You left. You gave me the power of choice, even after you had already seen. Caleb looked at her, surprised. I just didn't want to hurt you. Relika finally met his eyes, unguarded, and that is why I am here. A fragile understanding had begun to form between them, one not built on apologies, but on a deeper recognition. A human had accidentally glimpsed something sacred, but instead of claiming it, he had stepped back. From the moment she stepped into Caleb's room that night, something between them shifted. Relika, still cloaked in her flowing blue robes, now spoke with a different kind of weight. Not defensive or wary, no. This time her voice was layered, with hesitation and choice. The kind of choice that comes from vulnerability met with respect. She sat on the edge of the room's curved bench near the window, overlooking the 3 moons of Veratus Prime. Soft starlight glowed across the metal walls, casting faint halos around them both. I was told, she began slowly, that humans are impulsive, reckless, curious beyond reason. You chase knowledge without understanding the cost. Caleb didn't interrupt. He just listened. My people, we were not always so cautious. Long ago, when we first made contact with other species, we were more open. We shared our form, our songs, our dreams. But those species? She hesitated, voice tightening. They feared what they didn't understand. They tried to capture our light form, tried to replicate our transition cycles. Some even believed we were unstable mutations. Caleb's stomach turned. That's horrible, Relika nodded. So we learned to hide. The robes you see, they're more than garments. They are our armor, our silence, our protection. She turned her head slightly, eyes glowing beneath the veil. But when you saw me, you did not react like the others once did. He sat forward, careful not to move too fast. You looked like something, alive and impossible at the same time. I've never seen anything so, I don't know, pure, real. That made her pause. You did not see a monster? He shook his head. I saw someone brave enough to exist in a form most beings would never understand. That's not monstrous. That's divine. Relika was still for a long moment. Then, softly, you say words like a sculptor places stone. Deliberately, he gave a sheepish grin. I'm still terrified I'll say the wrong thing. You already have, she said. And then you followed it with something that made me think. She stood, crossing the room slowly, her robes swaying like waves. She moved to the center and took a deep breath, fingers curling slightly beneath her sleeves. In Shiraxi culture, she said, there is something called the phase of releasing. It is when we show a chosen person not our body, but our essence, our unfiltered presence. Few have seen it outside our kind. Caleb straightened. I don't want to pressure you. You are not, she said, gently interrupting. You gave me the one thing no one else has ever offered. Silence when you could have spoken. Distance when you could have come closer. You left. When every part of you likely wanted to understand. He looked down, heart hammering. I didn't want to take what wasn't given. Her 6 eyes softened. That is why I would now like to offer it freely. Caleb froze. Wait, you mean now? She nodded. Only if you are still willing to see, Not just what I am, but who I am. He didn't hesitate. I'm willing. She raised one hand, and the robe unraveled, not dropped or removed, but dissolved into motes of light that scattered through. The air, like drifting fireflies, where the robed figure had stood moments ago, now shimmered. Relika, unbound and glowing. Her form had evolved. No longer merely a cascade of glowing patterns, she now radiated intention. Her tendrils no longer drifted, they moved toward him, cautiously, like curious fingers tracing the air. Her body flickered slightly, translucent and real at once, and the light that pulsed along her limbs thrummed in response to his presence. Caleb stepped closer, gently, slowly. May I? You may. He reached out, his hand brushing the edge of her tendrils. The sensation was indescribable, like warm starlight running across his skin. Not physical, exactly. More like a memory given shape. She shivered at the touch, then laughed, a delicate, musical sound that resonated like wind chimes in a canyon. I didn't know humans could feel the current. I don't know what that means, Caleb admitted, smiling. But I felt something. She leaned closer, her eyes wide and unshielded. That is enough. In that moment, no words were needed. Relika had taken the unspoken space between them and filled it with trust. After that night, everything changed, not just between Caleb and Relika, but within the quiet walls of their shared dorm, and perhaps unknowingly, across a wider stretch of the galaxy. The next morning, the Academy's usual rhythms returned. Lectures, holographic labs, alien sports matches, and zero-gravity arenas. But something intangible had shifted. Caleb walked the campus with a strange lightness in his chest, as though he were carrying a secret too beautiful to name. Relika returned to her usual attire in public, her flowing blue robe once again obscuring her bioluminescent form. But Caleb could tell the difference now. Her posture had softened. Her eyes, once hidden behind opaque filters, glowed more openly beneath the veil. She no longer avoided him in public. In fact, she often lingered near him between classes or shared quiet conversations under the Academy's crystalline trees. To the outside world, they were simply two exchange students navigating the complexities of galactic academia. But in private, something rare was blooming. Evening after evening, Relika would return to their suite, and when the door was locked and the lights dimmed, she would shed the veil. Not always her full form, but pieces of it, a shimmer of skin, a flicker of her phase tendrils, an occasional low hum that she later explained was the Shiraxi equivalent of laughter. Caleb didn't press for more. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he shared stories from Earth childhood memories, songs from old country radio stations, and awkward tales about school dances and mud-soaked summer days. Relika listened, enraptured. I used to think humans were so solid, she admitted one night, floating lazily in the room's high-humidity dome while Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor, so fixed in shape and thought. But now I see you bend in your own way. You just don't glow when you do it. Caleb grinned. Well, maybe we're just hiding it better. Her tendrils twitched in amusement. Then came the invitation. Formal gathering hosted by the Council of Concord Species, a diplomatic event that invited one representative from each major Academy program to demonstrate cross-species cultural harmony. Normally, Relika would have declined. Shiraxi rarely attended public functions, but this time she didn't just accept. She asked Caleb to go with her. You were the first being outside my kind to witness me, she said quietly. Let us now be seen together. Word of their appearance spread like wildfire. Whispers trailed them when they arrived at the crystalline plaza, students and ambassadors alike pausing as Relika walked still robed, still regal with Caleb at her side. But it was what came next that stunned the crowd into silence. As part Of the ceremony, each species offered a symbolic gesture of trust. Some sang, others shared ritual dances, light forms, or mind links. When Relika's turn came, she stepped forward and removed her robe. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. Her body, once hidden and protected, now stood radiant in the central light. Her bioluminescent tendrils moved like living flame, her skin reflecting colors that shifted with emotion. She stood unafraid, unashamed unveiled in a way no Shiraxi had ever done publicly. And when Caleb stepped beside her, she reached out not for tradition, but for something more. She placed a single tendril across his chest, glowing warmly where it touched. "This human saw me without permission," she announced. Her voice echoed, amplified by the plaza's crystalline acoustics. And instead of speaking of it, he chose silence. Instead of claiming knowledge, he chose respect. Instead of running toward me, he walked away to protect what I did not yet give. The room fell utterly still. Relika turned to Caleb. And when I chose to show him again, he did not treat it as a right, but as a gift. The council members exchanged looks. Some stunned, some curious, some visibly moved. "This is what trust looks like," Relika finished. "Not perfect, not easy, but earned, slowly, gently." And then, to the amazement of everyone present, the council speaker, an ancient being from the crystal-bodied Ilthari, rose and declared, "Let the record show that on this day, a Shiraxi shed her form and a human carried it not with arms, but with honor." From that moment, interspecies policy regarding the Shiraxi began to shift. Trade requests opened. Diplomatic missions began forming. For the first time, Shiraxi students volunteered for open study in other institutions. All because of one accidental moment. One glimpse. One human who didn't treat discovery as conquest. Back on the balcony of their dorm weeks later, Caleb leaned against the railing, watching starlight play across the academy skyline. Relika joined him, once again unveiled, her form glowing faintly in the night air. "You changed everything," she said softly. Caleb chuckled. "I just walked into the wrong room." "No," Relika replied, touching his shoulder. "You walked into the right one and chose to leave it with dignity." They stood there in silence, not needing words, because sometimes the greatest connection between species doesn't begin with war or diplomacy. It begins with respect.